Let's see, recording,
Should I
and
click
we're
continue?
off.
Yeah.
We're good. Hey, everybody, it's Sean Murphy with 1455. Welcome back to another edition of our ongoing series, the 1455 interview. I hope many of you are seeing the face across from me as a familiar one because Nathan Leslie was just our featured author in our author series. If after this interview you want more, and why wouldn't you want more, you can go to our YouTube page or our website and check out our entire conversation and see him in action. You can also see him in action in the most recent issue of Movable Type, where he contributed an essay about writing during COVID. So let me introduce my friend and our guest, Nathan Leslie. Nathan is the 2019 Washington Writers Publishing House Fiction Award winner for his story collection, Hurry Up and Relax, which I could not recommend more highly. And again, we talked about that in detail during our last hour-long conversation. His 9 previous books of fiction include Three Men, Root and Shoot, Sibs, and The Tall Tale of Tommy Twice. He's also the author of a collection of poems, Night Sweat. Nathan is currently the series editor for Best Small Fictions and founder and organizer of the amazing Reston Reading Series in Reston, Virginia. He's the publisher and editor of the new online journal, Maryland Literary Review, and he lives in Northern Virginia with his wife, Julie, and 2 cats who we were just talking about. Nathan, welcome back to the hot seat. It's good to see you again.
Hey, thanks, Sean. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. I mean, the more authors we hear from, the better. And as I typically say at the outset of these, you know, inevitably there's some answers across the spectrum that are fairly similar, but of course, writers are individuals, so we're getting all kinds of different answers as well. So I've been looking forward to hearing what you have to say about some of these things. So let's jump right in with the most important question. What's the first book that made you want to be a writer, or a book that changed your life at a pivotal age?
That's a great question. I mean, in high school, I started really becoming interested in writing, and I started writing on my own outside of the structure of a class. And I don't know. I mean, I think probably something like Lord of the Flies or 1984. Those were the kinds of books I was reading, or even Catcher in the Rye. I think I read that in 9th grade. Those were the books that really spurred my imagination, and so mostly novels. And of course, we had our array of miscellaneous poems and short stories, but the novels are the ones that sort of stick out to me. Sort of the typical books that a high school kid would read in those days. And then I started writing poetry first, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe this is a good enough follow-up. If you had to say who your most profound artistic influence is, or one of them, who comes to mind?
I mean, in college and undergrad, I really, I started taking creative writing classes. We didn't actually have any creative writing classes in my high school. Classes were pretty traditional, composition literature. But when I think it was the summer of 1991, I took my first creative writing class with Steve Watkins, who is a writer in Fredericksburg, Virginia. He still lives down there. He retired, has since retired from Mary Washington, now called the University of Mary Washington. And at that time, I was exposed to, actually a little bit before that, I think, I was exposed to folks like Flannery O'Connor and Raymond Carver, Tobias Wolff, and that sort of group of writers. Obviously Flannery O'Connor was a little bit earlier, but Julio Cortázar, Borges, from the sort of the magical realist approach, also were really appealing to me. So that was kind of the central group for me, and then I sort of branched out from there.
Yeah, a lot of familiar, and I can relate, from both that era, and I think there's kind of the rite of passage, both in terms of high school and college, of the books that professors did and probably still do recommend for kind of the fundamentals, and for someone that's turn to short fiction, I think, I also share like a profound reverence that lingers to this day for Flannery O'Connor, because
Yeah.
that remains kind of like the best instruction manual to see how this comes together.
Yeah, when I was a freshman, I took a short story class, a literature short story class, even before the creative writing class. And I had a good professor who was an adjunct at Mary Washington. And I really fell in love with the short story. And so that was a profound influence. And then that carried over into the creative writing classes. In fact, I think I still have my old anthology somewhere, from like 1990 or 1991. And, I have all my notes and annotations and everything. And those stories, Joyce Carol Oates was another one who I discovered at that time. Just really profound influences for me.
Yeah. Okay. How about an album or movie or both that you recommend without reservation?
Let's see. In terms of literary influences, or just in general?
Just in general, something that comes to mind that there's no hesitation.
I mean, one of the films that I was really influenced by early on, that is just an amazing movie, is Apocalypse Now. And I remember watching that film, since I'm still kind of on the train of thinking about these old college classes. I remember watching that film in conjunction with Heart of Darkness, of course. And at the time, we were also reading Chinua Achebe, and discussing what he had to say about Heart of Darkness, and then sort of carrying forward to Apocalypse Now. I mean, it's just such an amazing film. But it's interesting. I've been actually really influenced by a lot of film, especially foreign film directors, and so yeah, that's definitely there. I mean, definitely the French New Wave, and all the indie directors that came out of the 70s and the 80s, Scorsese and on. And then in terms of music, I'm also a huge music fan. In fact, I've written a music column for Atticus Review for a couple of years. And recently the last 5 or 6 years, I've really delved a lot into Radiohead. And, all the Radiohead albums are amazing. In Rainbows is one that I come back to a lot. I mean, it's just so melodic and deep. So yeah, Radiohead is for me where it's at right now. But there's many others.
Of course. Well, so interestingly, that's the first time in this series that Radiohead or Apocalypse Now have come up, which now that I hear them is kind of surprising, but I'm glad that they both have come up, because I concur, and they're both very worthy additions to the conversation. So if anyone is watching this and hasn't heard or watched either of those, highly recommended, suffice it to say. All right, this is an impossible one, but it's still fun. If you had to try to pick the best first or last line of any book, it doesn't have to be the best, but what's one that really stands out to you?
I'm sorry, can you say again?
Yeah, the best first or last line of any book.
I mean, I always think of Moby Dick. Doesn't get much better than that. And then, of course, it proceeds for another 800 pages. Last lines, I can't really think of anything off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
That's all right. But you name check Moby Dick, and well, we'll get to that. Actually, I'll skip ahead, because that's one of the questions that we have to ask. I'm assuming I know the answer now, but the question as written is, why have you not read Moby Dick? Or if you have, is there a classic that you've been meaning to get around to reading?
I mean, Pynchon is one of those writers who is super intimidating, and I've read The Crime of Lot 49, but I have not approached any of Pynchon's other longer books, and so I think for me, Pynchon is right up there with the top. And I guess I'm just not really super into Pynchon, or yet I haven't really found an access point. But yet I've read Ulysses and a lot of other books just as difficult. So for some reason, I guess that's where I would land on that one.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. How about an underrated author that you'd love to give some attention to?
I mean, one author who we actually included in Best Small Fictions, which I edited last year, is Lydia Davis. She's a flash fiction writer, and just over the last few years, she's received a lot of attention through the New Yorker and some other reviews and essays about her work. But I mean, she's an amazing flash fiction author, and I would say the flash fiction in general is it flies a little bit under the radar for a lot of readers, and the um, typical reader doesn't necessarily look to a flash fiction collection as their top buy, but Lydia Davis's collected stories are incredible and so well crafted, and yet they're always elusive, so they really make you, it's almost like I in my world literature class, I'm teaching a Taoist text, for example, and the Tao Te Ching, and there's this concept of the paradox, of course, and there's something paradoxical to a lot of Lydia Davis's work that is really compelling, because they make you sort of like the best work of Carver. They sort of make you reflect a little bit about the white space on the page and what is not there.
That's great. And give a shout out to the book that you edited, the Best Small Fictions. Give us
Best Small Fictions, 2019 and 2020. I've been the series editor of that anthology, and yeah, it's just been a wonderful experience. I'm super grateful to my publisher and also to Tara Massi, who originally suggested that I sort of take the mantle of Best Small Fictions. And it's been a delightful enterprise, because we've kind of expanded from the smaller anthologies to a much larger anthology. Bigger is not necessarily better, but
Sure.
but it's certainly something that has enriched my life, and I hope that the readers get something out of it. And I guess what I would say about Best Small Fictions also is that it shows my interest in international fiction and just international writing in general. I think sometimes the American reader forgets about work that is produced outside of the U.S. And there's so much amazing work that is written, in Europe and in Asia and in Africa and South America and the Caribbean and all over the world that deserves attention.
Right. Well, and thank you for doing your part to help expose us to that. That's fantastic stuff.
Sure.
So we got into this a little bit during our lengthy discussion previously, but if you could say, is there a single theme or topic that your work seeks to address?
No. I think it just depends. I think it just depends on the project. With Hurry Up and Relax, we talked about some of the themes during the longer conversation. I'm certainly trying to capture a kind of, I'm trying to provide a window to what is happening to people around us, I guess I would say, right now. So it's a very contemporary work. It doesn't look back, doesn't look forward. It's really just about now, and trying to address some of the weirdness and oddity of the U.S. and all of its warts and blemishes, I guess I would say, and in a kind of a satirical way in a lot of the stories, although not all of them. But other of my collections have been different and have been much more serious and much more sort of, I guess, purposeful in a different way. So, for example, Three Men is a collection of novellas, and obviously, as the title implies, that particular book focuses on the experiences of men or boys growing up, young men, actually, in most cases. Drivers, which is a previous book I referred to in our longer conversation, was one of my first collections, in which all of the stories in that book revolved around cars and car culture, which I'm constantly fascinated by. And at that point, I was driving a lot, much more than I do now, and constantly on the road. So I was just sort of a fly on the mobile wall, I guess you would say.
Yep.
I've written a couple of collections of flash fiction, Reverse Negative and Root and Shoot, and those are not necessarily thematically cohesive at all. I mean, they're all over the place in terms of approaches and themes. And I think with flash fiction, it sort of lends itself a little bit more to experimentation and trying new things that maybe I wouldn't try in a novel or short story. I have another collection called Believers, which is thematically oriented, and it focuses really on the theological or religious experience of individuals. That's a book that really didn't get that much attention because it was published, well, all my books have really been published by small presses, but this one was published by a really small press, and I don't think it's in print anymore. But it was a fascinating book to write, and for that book, I did quite a bit of research, actually. So it almost has like an anthropological feel to it. So the short answer is no. The long answer is really just depends on. I do really think about theme a lot when I'm obviously focused on a project, but not so much overall as, you know, here's my one theme. Here's something I'm interested in. It really just depends on what I'm working on at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So how about writing routines? Do you believe in them, and do you have one?
I do. In the summer, I really just try to write as much as possible in the summer during those about 3.5 months when I have time. And I typically write in the morning, and then I go out and get some exercise, and then I come back and I write in the afternoon until about dinner time, and then I stop. So I really write a lot in the summer during the week. Weekends I tend to not write quite as much, you know, just family and friends and other things. But you know, Monday through Friday I tend to write every day in the summer, so that gives me a nice chunk of time. During the school year, it's much more difficult because you know, I'm busy teaching, I'm busy grading. It's really difficult to squeeze in time, but I do focus on revision some, and I send out my writing a good amount, which is time consuming these days. And I dabble in editing and revision, and simply work on whatever projects I have sort of in the mix. But in the summer, that's when I mostly compose, and then typically, you know, so for example, this past summer I wrote a manuscript of a new novel, which I'd started in the spring, and I'm not finished yet. So next summer, I know I'm going to go back to it and hopefully complete the manuscript. So it has a nice, almost seasonal quality, you know. So I start kind of planting the seeds in the spring and summer, and then sort of evolve from there.
Right.
Yeah.
How about it? Has there been a significant setback, artistic or otherwise, that you look back on that ended up kind of helping shape your career or your life?
When you say setback, I mostly think of rejections
Yeah, as
from
as one
publishers.
does, sure.
Yeah. Um, I haven't really had a setback, I don't think, in terms of the work itself, but in terms of given publishers accepting the manuscripts, agents working with me, um, that part of the process can be very difficult because you never know and you can't control how your work is received by an editor or a publisher or an agent. So I've had various forms of success and various forms of frustrations with those. You know, it took me quite a long time to actually even get my first short story published. So kind of building up to answering your question fully, I think I sent out about 70 or 80 short story submissions before I first, you know, got a story accepted, and that was around 1997. So from 1995 to 1997, all I was collecting was rejection slips. Um, However, once I got my foot in the door, and then I started building my publication credits, and then around 2000, I received my MFA. That helped a lot. I started gaining traction in terms of publishing. And then, it's still the success rate is very poor for, I think, most authors in terms of sending their work out,
Sure.
unless you're a huge name. And I have to really be persistent and gritty in my approach, because I'm not the kind of writer who I think is, send one story out, it's snapped up by, the New Yorker, and then you just rise to fame. I think most authors have to really put their nose to the grindstone and constantly hustle. And it's not an easy part of writing. And in fact, it's almost like a different part of your brain, and a part that can be very difficult if you don't have a hard shell around you and a thick skin. So I've developed those, and but it's still never easy, because I always think of the what ifs, the really close calls that I had with certain publishers who will remain nameless at this point.
Right.
I won't call them out or anything, but there's certain publishers who I was really, really close to, and would have been nice if that worked out, but it didn't. And so that's what I think about more than my own work, is just how it's received, and how it's sort of processed by the literary machine, and those are things we don't have control over. So, for example, when Hurry Up and Relax was accepted as the WWPH prize winner, it was it was a huge surprise to me, because I never expect to win prizes. In fact, it was the very first kind of major prize I ever won. All my other books were simple submissions that I had to grind out, and it was a delight, and like I said, a real surprise to win that. But since then, I've received many, many rejections. I thought, okay, well, so I won this prize. Now it will be easy peasy, and I can just build on it. But it's not. It's still just as difficult.
Well, the reason that I include that question in this series, and so far the answers from all the writers have borne this out, that it's not to discourage a younger or aspiring author, but it's really, I think, I find a lot of comfort in the fact that it seldom, if ever, gets easier. It's fraught with rejection and setbacks. But really, you mentioned the key thing, which is developing that thick skin and being persistent, but also having, if your heart's not in it, and we've said this already in the series so many times, but if you're not doing it because you're scratching some kind of genuine spiritual itch within yourself, it's going to be a really long and unsatisfying road, because it is so filled with pauses and silence and rejection, and then the moments of connection with other authors or readers make up for a lot of that solitary endeavor.
Yeah, writing is such a lonely enterprise, and that's why, perhaps sort of subconsciously, why I started the reading series, Rest and Readings, just to kind of connect with other writers in the area. I've been teaching at Nova, where I teach for 18 years, and there are a few writers there who I, work with and confide with, but mostly, I just do my thing. I teach, I go home and I write, and it's really nice to connect with other writers, because it is so solitary. But back to the rejection process. Just one other thing I would mention is, it's been really satisfying over the last 20 years to develop a relationship with editors. Editors are sort of the unsung heroes of the publishing world, and a lot of times they don't get sort of the credit that they deserve, I think. So one thing I started doing, and perhaps writers who are listening to me can steal this trick, at least back in the old days when I was sending out hard copy manuscripts, right? And I would receive hard copy rejection slips or acceptances. I used to receive sometimes really nice, what I call positive rejections, which are, rejections where there's a nice note, hey, please
Yeah.
send more work, or I really like this. And I would always save them. In fact, I still have a big binder filled with them. I would save them and I would go to the copy store and make a copy and send it back to them with my next submission. So I would say, hey, remember you said this? Here's another story. Now, of course, with Submittable and other digital forms of submission, you can just copy paste the email or the notification. But that's been a really rewarding approach, is sort of developing a rapport with editors and trying them again. If they like my work and they say, hey, this story didn't work for me, but why don't you try us again? I always follow up, always, always.
Yeah, and that's come up. I'm really glad you said that, Nathan, because that has actually come up in this series as well. And I've read, even just in thinking in the last year, more than a handful of times where an editor, whether it's on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, saying, "See, we mean it when we say that," and it's very affirming to see editors, really make a point of saying, when we send an encouraging letter, we mean it. So try us again.
Right.
And that's the best way to establish that rapport, and understand that these are real human beings that are genuinely looking for something that they can connect with. So yeah, I think that's great advice.
Thank you. Yeah, and especially because it's so competitive now. Also, it's even more competitive now than it was when I first started. And there's so many millions of writers that it's very difficult. So
Well,
anyway,
again, just in this series, talking to a few dozen authors, talking about their volumes, and I include myself in that category for sure. The volumes of rejection slips, it just makes you appreciate on kind of a micro level that you can then extrapolate to a macro level. That's a lot of stories, a lot of novels, a lot of rejections. Like, it is a big ocean full of a lot of quality content, and it all can't find a home. So part of it is just persistence and faith.
yes. And from the editorial side, now I'm an editor as well. Well, I have been an editor for a number of years. I started with Pedestal magazine. John Amen, I don't know if you know him. He's a poet in North Carolina. He got me into the editorial side with Pedestal as a fiction editor. And then over time, I ceased doing that. And I started now Maryland Literary Review and then Decimal Fictions. So from the editorial side, I know that it's really devastating because I simply can't take everything, even if, there are many, many stories in Decimal Fictions or poems and short stories and essays in Maryland Literary Review that I don't have room to publish, or they don't quite click. So I have to nicely say no a lot.
Sure.
So from the other side, it's just as interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And at times just as painful. Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
So all this is leading up to, I think, kind of the ultimate question, which is, and it's a tough one, but it's an important one. Can you define or explain what literary success means to you?
I mean, I think it's more about the process. I don't think there's an end goal, I mean, if you think of an end goal, then you're going to constantly be disappointed and feel as if you're never quite there, So initially I thought, when I started submitting my work, I'd really like to have a book, right? But then you have a book and then you think, okay, well, now what?
Yeah.
And I want a bigger book. So it's just it's a beast that you can never satisfy if you think like that. So I just think about the process. I don't think there's one definition of literary success. It really depends on your own individual ideas and what you would like to get across to the world. For me, it's just a personal source of joy and satisfaction and fascination to write. And the process of writing is what keeps me going, and trying to share those words with others and find a home, hopefully in a magazine or a book. That said, I still feel as if I have a long way to go. I mean, there are a lot of projects I'm still working on that that I would like to get out there and hopefully share with the world. And then there are others that are sort of percolating in the back of my brain that I know that eventually I will get to one of these days when I have time. So I guess the process part is what really fascinates me, and how you evolve as a writer. And I mean, I know from the outside perspective, my own work has changed a lot over the last 20 years. And I mean, the stories in Hurry Up and Relax, I couldn't have written those stories, I don't think, 10 years ago. They're just it's sort of a different mode of expression. And I guess for me, I'd really like to write some more novels. I have written many more novels than I've published. Only published one, but I've written others that haven't quite worked out yet. But I'm still working on that form. The short stories just sort of come more naturally. So I guess the void I'd like to fill is to become a little bit more of a novelist, and not just a short story writer who dabbles in novels and other things.
Yeah.
I'd also like to write more nonfiction. I have some nonfiction projects in the works, and yeah, we'll see what happens there.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah.
so the themes that emerge today and from our previous discussions are, very recurring themes when we talk about writing. It's being in love with the process, kind of being in awe of that process, and persistence, and also being part of a literary community. And I did this in our other conversation, but I also want to do it again and single you out as kind of the platonic ideal of what I would call the contemporary literary citizen, which is you very clearly make it a point to be productive. You respect the work, you respect your talent, and put in the time, but you're also doing what you can in various ways to showcase and celebrate the work of other writers. And I think that what comes from that is a body of work, clearly, but also a sensibility that has some satisfaction and soul. So you are someone that I would encourage any aspiring writer to use as a model and emulate. And that's the last question. If you had a 1-minute exhortation for a younger writer or an older writer that's looking for advice, what would you tell them?
I mean, I think just to immerse yourself in the literary world as much as you can. Reading, perhaps giving back in some way in terms of, like a reading series or editing, or even just being part of a writing group, at a workshop. I think those kinds of things really help, because even if you think that you can do it all on your own, and you probably can, it's nice to just to sort of find some influences that you wouldn't necessarily select for yourself, if that makes any sense. So I mean, we all kind of have our own algorithms in our mind, and we gravitate towards certain kinds of writers or certain authors, and that's great. But sometimes it's good to have work foisted upon you, so to speak. And here's this story, or here's this novel, and here's this poem, and what do you make of it? And that approach is really interesting. And then just writing as much as you can, without exhausting yourself. I think for some people, just the writing process or the writing habit rather of sitting down a certain time every day, that's great. For me, it's more, as I mentioned, sort of seasonal and focusing on certain months of the year where I have the time to do it. But yeah, just immersing yourself in words, just like you're learning a new language. The immersion experience is how you learn French or Spanish or German or whatever. Same thing with how to create interesting work. So I guess that's my answer. Yeah.
What enough said. Immerse yourself in the literary life. What else is there? So Nathan, teacher, writer, editor, literary series curator, all around literary citizen. I thank you for being here. Folks, if you're watching, again, you can get a taste of Nathan's prose in issue 2 of Movable Type. You can check out our lengthy conversation about his story collection, Hurry Up and Relax, which I wholeheartedly recommend. I think you should check it out, get a copy of that, get a copy for a friend, and spread the word. Check out this author. And Nathan, we'll be talking to you again because that's what we do. But I appreciate you sharing, some really deep thoughts and your accumulated wisdom.
Thank you so much, Sean. This has been wonderful. It's been great to talk.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
See you soon. Bye.